Hello, brothers and sisters and friends in Christ. I just want to come on here to do a part 9. It's been about 3 weeks since I've done one of these videos, and I thought I was finished with these, but I was cleaning my top drawer out of my junk drawer in my room, and I come across something that is very important. And I've touched on some of this in one of my videos, but I didn't have this with me to read it all. But this is regarding the First Amendment rights. Is from the ACLU, American Civil Liberties Union. Know your rights, demonstrations, and protests as general guidelines. But it's 2 or 3 pages long. For those that are interested in street ministry, doing evangelistical work, we need to know this, and it wouldn't hurt to have a copy of this. I don't know where I think Brother Ryan Keel gave me this several years ago. It's been in my drawer for a long time, but you can find this on the internet with no problem. I'm sure you can find it without any problem. But anyway, I want to read these because we need to know. It wouldn't hurt to have a copy in your vehicle when you go somewhere to preach. Keep it with you to show the police and show other people that if they try to stop you from doing that, because we have a right. But here they are. So it's general guidelines, and it's in the form of questions. There's several questions. Can my free speech be restricted because of what I say, even if it's controversial? No. The First Amendment prohibits restrictions based on the content of speech. However, this does not mean that the Constitution completely protects all types of free speech activity in every circumstance. Police and government officials are allowed to place certain non-discriminatory and narrowly drawn time, place, and manner restrictions on the exercise of First Amendment rights. Any such restrictions must apply to all speech regardless of its point of view. So they can't be discriminative about, just because they don't like the street preacher. Some will try to come against the street preacher just because they don't like the street preacher, but they're not allowed to be biased and discriminatory as far as that goes. Where can I engage in free speech activity? Generally, all types of expression are constitutionally protected in traditional public forums such as, now pay close attention, streets, sidewalks, and parks. In addition, your speech activity may be permitted to take place at other public locations that the government has opened up to similar speech activities, such as the plazas in front of governmental buildings. So these are some of the places that we can either protest or preach. What about free speech activity on private property? The general rule is that the owners of private property may set rules limiting your free speech. If you disobey the property owner's rules, they can order you off their property and have you arrested for trespassing if you do not comply. But let me go ahead and give a little added to that. We have gotten permission before to stand in front of businesses. An owner of a laundromat in Greenwood gave me permission one time to use his, because I asked him. See, you got to ask questions sometime. Ask people if you can use their parking lot or their front of their building. So I asked him if I could use that laundromat. He said, okay. I even had him write out a note, and he actually printed it out for me, and he signed off on it, and he handed it to me, giving me permission in case the police or somebody come up and question me. I had that paper to show that owner of that business gave me permission. So that's just an example. You can get permission if you ask. Some of them will give you permission. Another question: Do I need a permit before I engage in free speech activity? Not usually. However, certain types of events require permits. Generally, these events are a march or parade that does not stay on the sidewalk or other events that require blocking traffic or street closure. A large rally requiring the use of sound amplifying devices, or a rally at certain designated parks or plazas. I know a church in Columbus, Mississippi. They every year they have a permit to block off a whole street, a block right there. I think it's by their church, and they can do that because they get permission. They have to get a permit to do that. So see, we have, as I answered one of the other questions, we have the right to stand on public sidewalks and parks and public forums without having a permit. Go back and listen to anything you may have forgotten in this video. Just later on, rewind it like a cassette tape, yeah. But go back and listen to anything if you forget anything I said. But so we have to get a permit for streets, whole streets. You cannot use a whole street or parade, use that whole street for a parade or a big event without a permit. You have to have a permit to use it for a big event. Now, I can stand on a public street and preach the gospel, if it's just me, if it's, there's certain fine lines there. Okay. Just go back and if anybody has any input, correct me and put a comment down in the video. If you hear anything I say that you don't agree with, or if you want to add anything, put a comment down. Please say anything you want to say. Many permit procedures require that the application be filed several weeks in advance of the event. However, the First Amendment prohibits such an advance notice requirement from being used to prevent rallies or demonstrations that are rapid responses to unforeseeable and recent events. Also, many permit their displeasure. Police are permitted to keep two TWO, two antagonistic groups separated, but should allow them to be within the general vicinity of one another. So if me and somebody else is out there, and we may not agree on everything, maybe antagonistic, but we both have a right to be out there. Like if I'm on the street, now a little bit later I was going to bring that out too. If I'm preaching somewhere and somebody else wants to walk up to me and voice their view, I'll get to that in a little bit. They have the right to even counter me as long as they don't physically touch me, physical harm. Same way with two different people doing two different events. If I'm preaching, if somebody else wants to come preach, or, they have a right to be out there too. I can't make them leave just because I may not want them out there, or because I'm preaching. I don't have the right to make them leave, so they have a right too. Does it matter if other speech activities have taken place at the same location? Yes, the government cannot discriminate against activities because of the controversial content of the message. Thus, if you can show that similar events to yours have been permitted in the past, such as a Veterans or Memorial Day parade, then that is an indication that the government is involved in selective enforcement if they are not granting you a permit. So we need to understand that, right? Because sometimes the police, they may not always like us. They're not always going to like the street preacher. Who does? The devil don't like the street preacher. So even though we have rights, as you'll see in this guideline right here, the police don't always abide by it. They don't always know it. And people don't like us when we go out to street preach. But we have the same rights as anybody else does. Let me move on. What other types of free speech activity are constitutionally protected? The First Amendment covers all forms of communication, including music, theater, film, and dance. Sometimes I see people dancing. I'll be at college campuses or different places working, and I'll see kids out there doing some kind of dance together. They out in the public doing it. They have a right to do that. They have a right to be out there dancing if they want to. The Constitution also protects actions that symbolically express a viewpoint. Examples of these symbolic forms of speech include wearing masks and costumes or holding a candlelight vigil. However, symbolic acts and civil disobedience that involve illegal conduct may be outside the realm of constitutional protections and can sometimes lead to arrest and conviction. Oh, I could get on a soapbox about that. But there's been a lot of bad things happening on the streets. People even hurting people in these big cities like Seattle and and Los Angeles, and people actually hurting others. But I ain't gonna get into all that. I'll leave that alone. But they're not supposed to be allowed to do that. Therefore, while sitting in a road may be expressing a political opinion, the act of blocking traffic may lead to criminal punishment. Sadly, so like I said, some are allowed to get away with things like that. But we're not supposed to. By law, you're not supposed to block a street that keeps people from coming by, or if you're hurting physically, doing things to people, we're not allowed to do that. What should I do if my rights are being violated by a police officer? Now, this is a good question. What should I do if my rights are being violated by a police officer? It rarely does any good to argue with a street patrol officer. Ask to talk to a supervisor and explain your position to him or her. Point out that you are not disrupting anyone else's activity and that the First Amendment protects your actions. If you do not obey an officer, you may be arrested and taken from the scene. You should not be convicted if a court concludes that your First Amendment rights have been violated. So, back to this goes along with some of the other things I've done said. Police oftentimes, they don't know what we're doing out there, why we're out there preaching. Sadly, police, they're sinners just like you and I, people. They're sinners like anybody else, and they get hostile themselves when they see a street preacher. And sometimes an officer will come up to a street preacher and tell them they need to leave, even if they're on a public sidewalk. They may be in a public forum, a public sidewalk, and they're not hurting anybody. We're exercising our free speech right to be on that sidewalk to preach. But oftentimes police officers will try to run us away. And it's because they don't know this. They don't know this, or they don't like you for being out there. So you don't need to argue. We need to be careful. We need to be careful that the flesh is weak. But we need to be careful we don't get too angry with them or argue with them, because that doesn't do you any good. You just need to ask them, can I see your supervisor and let me explain to him what I have, the right that I have. And sometimes they'll go get their supervisor or call them, on the walkie-talkie and whatever the case, or call them on the phone. It may let them come talk to you. So I've seen Brother Keel at a confrontation one time. He did a video when there was some police officers that was even hostile towards him, and he was exercising his free speech right to be in front of that store in a public forum, such as by a conduit or manhole, or it's not always a sidewalk. We also have the right to be right there on the public part of the grass. Sometimes there's grassy areas that you can stand in, like by a fire hydrant or something like that. And the store didn't own that part, but the police was trying to tell him he needs to leave. And Brother Keel stood his ground. He said, go get your supervisor. I'm not leaving. I have a right to be here. Now, they could have taken took him to, I guess, they could have taken him, handcuffed him and taken him to jail, but they didn't. God worked in his favor. And eventually I saw the video, they left. They eventually left. So that was a victory for Brother Keel. So we have that right. If a police officer tells you need to leave and you're on a public sidewalk or any other public forum, you have the right to say, sir, kindly, you can go get your supervisor. And I need to talk to them about this. I'm not just going to leave. Anyway, you get my point. We need to know our rights, and this right here explains what I just said. So let me move on. Oh, praise God. Ordinances give a lot of discretion to the police officer or city officials to impose conditions on the event, such as the route of a march or the sound levels of amplification equipment. Now, I mentioned that in another video. We need to be wise on how we use our amplification. Sometimes I don't use it too loud. Like if there's neighborhoods, like a neighborhood, and there's a bunch of houses around, I respect the people in the houses enough to not turn my amplification real loud. So the police can stop you from using amplification if it's disturbing the peace. Such restrictions may violate the First Amendment if they are unnecessary for traffic control or public safety, or if they interfere significantly with effective communication with the intended audience. So if the police are trying to interfere, but see, that's when you can draw the line. They shouldn't interfere with you if there's an audience of people. If there's like 50 or more, number, I don't really know, the number doesn't matter. But if there's a group of people listening to you, even though it's loud, but if it's not hurting them and the people are there wanting you to be there, there's a fine line right there. It says, let me read that again. Such restrictions may violate, the police they will be in violation of the First Amendment if they are unnecessarily for traffic control or public safety, if they interfere significantly with effective communication. Get that, effective communication with the intended audience. A permit cannot be denied because the event, that means you still may have to get a permit for certain, depending on what it is. A permit cannot be denied because the event is controversial or will express unpopular views. Now, my goodness, see there, back to what I was saying earlier. The preacher is very unpopular, and it's very controversial at times what we preach. When we preach against sin or false religion or anything that's controversial, the police may not like that, and some people don't like that, and they may try to stop, but it says a permit cannot be denied because the event is controversial or will express unpopular views. So, same way with the public sidewalk. They're not really supposed to run you off even if you don't have to get a permit. This is talking about getting a permit, but back to some of the other questions I read, even if it's a public sidewalk where you don't have to get a permit, our preaching is controversial at times, but they just because it's controversial, nobody is supposed to stop you from using your First Amendment right. So even the police cannot stop you from using your First Amendment right. See, it doesn't matter if we're offending, as long as we're not physically harming anybody, we have the right to be out there. If organizers have not, I'm almost done. These are specific problems. If organizers have not obtained a permit, where can a march take place? If marchers stay on the sidewalks and obey traffic and pedestrian signals, their activity is constitutionally protected even without a permit. Marchers may be required to allow enough space on the sidewalk for normal pedestrian traffic and may not maliciously obstruct or detain passerbys. May I distribute leaflets and other literature on public sidewalks? Yes, such as tracts, gospel tracts. Yes, you may approach pedestrians on public sidewalks with leaflets, newspapers, petitions, or solicitations for donations without a permit. Tables may also be set up on sidewalks for these purposes if sufficient room is left for pedestrians to pass. These types of free speech activities are legal as long as entrance to buildings are not blocked and passerbyers are are not physically and maliciously detained. However, a permit may be required to set up a table. So, like I said, there's some fine line things we need to know. I don't know everything about, I've never set up a table. And now we did the balloon festival one time. Yeah, matter of fact, we got permission. Yeah, we set up a booth at a balloon festival in Greenwood one time, and we was handing out literature and preaching. So we did do that before. Do I have a right to picket on public sidewalks? Yes. And this is also an activity for which a permit is not required. You don't have to get a permit to be on a public sidewalk, to even picket. Now that means like holding up signs or, even preaching. However, picketing must be done in an orderly, non-disruptive fashion so the pedestrians can pass by and entrance to buildings are not blocked. We're not supposed to block anybody from walking by. And even, let me go ahead and just add this too. If you're handing out a tract, you can't stop them and say, you need to get this tract. Some people just keep on walking. They won't take a tract from you. You can't, there has been times I'll keep talking and preaching as they're walking by, but I can't go just block them from walking by and say, take this tract. You better, you can't, you just got to let them keep going. You got to let them keep walking. You can't stop them if they don't want to stop and talk. So we got to be wise on how we do it. Amen. Can government impose a financial charge on exercising free speech rights? Some local governments have required a fee as a condition of exercising free speech rights, such as application fees, security deposits, or for cleanup, or charges to cover overtime police costs. Charges that cover actual administrative costs have been permitted by some courts. However, if the costs are greater because an event is controversial, parentheses, or a hostile crowd is expected, such as requiring a large insurance policy, then the courts will not permit it. Also, regulations with financial requirements should include a waiver for groups that cannot afford the charge, so that even grassroots organizations can exercise their free speech rights. Therefore, a group without significant financial resources should not be prevented from engaging in a march simply because it cannot afford the charges the city would like to impose. And this stuff right here can get real deep, real deep and tedious. Last one. Do counter demonstrators have free speech rights? This is the one I was telling you earlier about. If I'm out there preaching, somebody else can counter, they can preach too. Yes, although counter demonstrators should not be allowed to physically disrupt the event they are protesting, they do have the right to be present and to voice. So, as much as we don't like that sometimes, nobody likes opposition. If any street preacher would be honest, no street preacher likes opposition, but they have a right to be out there and oppose. Every time I go out and preach, I never know what's going to happen. It could be somebody that's going to come up and either hit me, or now they can be in trouble for doing that. But you never know what they're going to do. They may come up and start cussing me out, or somebody else can come up. They can use that sidewalk to start preaching too while I'm preaching. It's called, they put it right here, counter demonstrators. Do counter demonstrators have free speech rights? They may try to counter what I'm preaching. Like in the realm of politics, you see that too. You see one party and another party. They may clash at times, or, different groups of people may clash. Sadly, it leads to physical harm oftentimes, and it shouldn't be that way. But everybody has the right to be out there. Everybody has a right. So, and I've said this before while I'm preaching. If another religion wants to preach, they have every right. I've said that even while I was preaching. I said, this is our free speech right. Even a Muslim has a right to be on the sidewalk, and speak or preach whatever he does. he has a right. Everybody has a right. So we need to know our rights. That's one good thing about being in the land of the free, and it's one thing about America. You know, we need to thank God for America. I know a lot of people are anti-American and such as that, but hey, if you're anti-American, go to some other country and try to have the same free speech as you do in the United States, and you won't find it. You won't find America has anyway. That's another story. But I just wanted to read this, and for anybody, to encourage anybody, to inform anybody. Information is valuable. Information is very important. It's been said that information and the mind is that's the most valuable thing to eat. You don't need to waste your mind. You don't need to ignore knowledge. So we need to understand our rights. But hope this helps somebody.